we are going to be looking at finding x and y intercepts. We already know one way to find a y-intercept, right? How can we find a y-intercept of a line? Right. So if we have the equation of a line, we just solve it for y, and then we can see what that is. Or if we know like a point, we could do that where we've plugged in the point and find our y-intercept, right? So if we have an equation and it's solved for y, we just know y equals mx plus b, and b is the y-intercept, right? So we can find that coordinate. So that is one way that we can find a y-intercept. So we already know one of the ways to find a y-intercept. We do not know any ways right now to find an x-intercept, except for probably you could graph something for me, right? If I asked you what the x-intercept is, you could graph it. If it worked out to be on grid lines, you could probably figure out what it was. But we're going to look at some different ways that we can find x and y intercepts. So for an x-intercept, the y coordinate is always going to be the same. What is that y coordinate going to equal? Why is this not letting me write? Okay, let's see. Okay, y coordinate always equals 0. If you think about graphing something, right? If it's going to be on the x-axis, then you need the first coordinate to be whatever number. The second one has to be 0, because if you go up or down any, then you're not going to be on the x-axis anymore. So for an x-intercept, the y-coordinate equals 0. The y-intercept is the point where a function crosses the y-axis. And so what do you think goes in these blanks? For a y-intercept, the x-coordinate always equals 0, right? So it's the opposite whenever you're looking for x-intercept, y equals 0. When you're looking for the y-intercept, x equals 0. Okay? So, from a graph, you guys should be pretty proficient at finding x and y intercepts from a graph. Right? So if we are given a graph, when we are looking for the x-intercept, we're just looking for where we cross the x-axis. Sometimes they will give the answer just with a single number, but most of the time it's going to be a point, right? So I think that's probably Lanaya why it was not taking your answer on that problem that you were doing a minute ago, because you were just plugging in the single coordinate. What it probably wanted is, like, for this, instead of just saying 3, it would probably want 3, 0. I think it's probably the issue. Yeah. And the y-intercept, for our y-intercept, that would be this point right here. And the coordinates there are 0, 2. Yes? The second one?
Yeah, there's like another line.
It didn't really like.
Yeah.
Where they got a little close. Here, let me zoom in up here so you can see. Ooh, that's really close. All right, that's as good as I can get on zooming in for that graph right there. So if we were looking for the x-intercept for this graph, it falls right here. I know yours is not perfect on your graph. Ian, what are the coordinates of that point?
-7, 0.
-7, 0. And Anna Grace, what are the coordinates of the y? What? 0, 1. Good. Perfect. Okay, so we're just pulling those from our graph for those problems. Everybody okay with that part? All right. Okay. A y-intercept from an equation. To find a y-intercept, you plug in 0 for x, right? Because if we have a y-intercept, the x-coordinate has to be 0. Now, do you really even need to do that for number 3? No, because it's already solved for y. So what is the y-intercept there? -4. And they probably want it as a point a lot of the time anyway. So it'd be 0, -4. But it's still true that it works to find a y-intercept, plug in 0 for x. If I had done it that way, 3 times 0 minus 4, I would get that y equals -4, right? So I'd get that same value. But whenever it's already solved for y, you know what the y-intercept is. All right, so for example 4, you could solve that equation for y, and that would work. Or, I think it is a little bit quicker. If I'm plugging in, if I know that I'm looking for y-intercept, I can plug in 0 for my x. That will look like this. 3 times 0 minus y equals 6. What is 3 times 0? 0. That just goes away, right? So then I just have -y equals 6. What do I need to do to solve that? Divide by that -1. So y equals -6. And that would probably be written like this, 0, -6. If you want to do it even faster than that, we know we are going to plug in a 0 right there for that x, right? We're going to put 0 right there. And that basically is just going to make that x and anything with it go away, correct? Leaving me with 2y equals 9. What do I do to solve that? Divide by 2. Y equals 9/2. Probably write that as 0, 9/2, or 0, 4.5.
You said 9/2 or what?
4.5. Yeah. Okay. Questions? You can always solve those for y. It will give you the y-intercept. It's just, I think it's a little quicker and a little easier just to plug in that 0 for your x. There. All right, well, okay here? All right, x-intercept from an equation. To find an x-intercept, we're going to plug in 0 for the y. Now this you're going to have to do because actually, I guess if you did solve the equation for x, it would be an x equals 1 over m plus b or something. You might see, you could maybe do something weird. It'd be weird. Don't do that. So you cannot, whenever we have our equation in y equals mx plus b form, that does not give us the x-intercept, right? So we cannot find the x-intercept from just looking at the equation. So we are going to have to plug in 0 for y here. So for that first one, I would plug in 0 for the y. So I got 0 equals 2x minus 7. Giancarlo, how do I solve that for my x? Okay, we're just trying to get that x right there by itself. So we got to get rid of the 2 and the 7. Which one will we start with? Good? So we'll add the 7. So I got 7 equals 2x. Now I need to get rid of the 2. How would I do that, Giancarlo? Good. And so my x is going to equal 7/2 or 3.5 if you want to use a decimal. So it would be 7/2, 0. Okay. Takes a little more work for those if it's solved for y because you got to solve the equation a little bit more. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that? Uh-huh. I mean, you could do it that way. You could do like 2x minus 7 and divide everything by 2. So you get 0 equals x minus 7 halves. And then you would add 7 halves to the other side. So you could do it that way. I would not suggest doing that because sometimes you may, especially if it's like not a fraction problem anyway, sometimes it's going to cause you to have fractions when you wouldn't otherwise. But you could. Okay? Questions so far? All right. So the next one's a little tougher because you got a fraction. You're going to plug in 0 equals 3/4 x plus 6. So, Eddie, what would we do to solve this equation for x?
Minus 6.
Good. We're going to subtract 6 from both sides. That is going to give us negative 6 equals 3/4 x. Then what do we have to do?
Divide by 3/4.
Perfect. And Eddie, remind me what I've got to do. What do I do when I divide fractions? It's easy as pie. I flip the second and multiply.
I was going to say 3/4. You said 5.
Huh?
You said 5.
You're right. I'm not talking about that kind of pie. So the top number's our first one. We're just going to leave it negative 6. We're going to flip the second one, the fraction on the bottom, 4/3, and multiply. To multiply fractions, we're just going to put that over 1 and multiply straight across. So that'll give me negative 24 over 3. What is negative 24 divided by 3? Negative 8. So x equals negative 8. And then that would be negative 8, 0 if they want it as a coordinate point. With these, you may end up with quite a few fractions because it's pretty common for our slope to be a fraction. But just stay calm. Dividing fractions easy as pie. Flip second, multiply. You can do it. They taught you how to. I know for a fact they taught you how to do this in 6th grade because Hunter is now in 6th grade, and this is what he's not solving these equations, but he's dividing fractions right now. So you can do it. If they can, now there's a chance you never understood it well in the 6th grade. It's a flaw of the public education system that you may have never known how to divide fractions. But I won't ask you to raise your hand if it's not you, but I bet all of you passed the 6th grade, whether you knew how to divide fractions or not. And then you went to the 7th grade, and they expected you to know how to divide fractions, but you didn't know how to divide fractions. And they didn't have time to teach you how to divide fractions, so they gave you a calculator that would divide fractions. And you didn't know how to divide fractions then.
You can divide fractions on calculators?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. You gotta put parentheses around them. You would do. Just for your reference.
I was old the entire year, 7th grade. I used my computer for everything. Mostly because all we did the entire
negative
year
6 divided by, 3/4. Desmos will do it too. So negative 8. But this happens, and you have these gaps, and they never get filled because you passed. Like they pass you on. So ideally, you would not move on to it in math. You would not move on to a new topic till you pretty much mastered the last. But difficult to do in a public education system where there is one teacher and 20 kids. So, if you didn't learn how to divide fractions, They teach 6th graders how to divide fractions. You might not have been smart enough to figure it out when you were a 6th grader, but I bet you are that smart now. You know, and if we had just like delayed it a little bit, you probably would have understood it a little better. Sometimes I think they teach some things too early. So whenever you run across things like this, and you guys are decent with fractions, and you don't panic with fractions nearly as bad as a normal Math 1 class. Normally, my Math 1 class needs like some paper bags to hyperventilate in whenever they see a fraction. So you guys are a lot better than I normally see. But
mainly because it's not the worst thing I've seen.
yeah. So you guys keep your composure a little better than normal, but let's face it, I still don't think your favorite thing is fractions, but just we're going to keep working on it because you can learn it. I truly believe that. I think there are maybe some people in the world that have limited capacity and could not learn how to add and subtract fractions. I had one class one year, and it was a special ed class, so it wasn't like normal education students. But I had spent a whole week teaching kids how to add and subtract fractions in this class. And at the end of the week, I asked this one little kid what 1/2 plus 1/2 was. And he very confidently said 4.5. And I said, okay, we're going to move on to something else now because I've done all I can do here. But that particular child, though, before you make any judgments, that particular child, like, whenever he was very young, doctors told his parents he would never even be able to speak. So he was doing a really good job of, like, he learned to read, he could have a conversation with you, he could speak well. He had came a really long way. It was special ed class, you know. But fractions were definitely a little beyond his capability, at least at that point in his career. I believe there are people out there who cannot do fractions. I do not think any of you are anywhere close to being those people. So we can do it. All right. So the last one, I think these are easier than if they're solved for y. You're going to plug in 0 for y. Again, let's think about, you know, if you think about what's happening, you got negative 3x minus y minus 0 equals 9. Oops. Why is it not letting me do the eraser? Well, 0 right there equals 9. So that's just negative 3x equals 9. We just have to divide by negative 3. X equals negative 3. And so we would have negative 3, 0. Or I like to just kind of shortcut. Sometimes, like, you know, if it's on the computer screen, I'll just take my finger and cover up the y, right? Because, like, you're just covering up that y, pretending like it's not there. Because if it's 0, it's going to make the y and anything that's with that y go away. And then just divide by the negative 3. And x equals 3. So these, if they're in, this is called standard form when you have your x and your y on that same side. If it's in standard form, I do them in my head most of the time. I don't actually write them out. There. Okay. Any questions there? Yes. I better not, but thank you. I've eaten too much of my kids' Halloween candy already.
Did you like miswrite that x equals 0 as an x?
Oh, I did. This should be negative right there. All right. Okay. So I want you guys to try these 4 on your own. Find the x and y intercepts of each one of these equations. get x-intercept of 5/3, 0, y-intercept of 0, -5. 10, you should get an x-intercept of -16, 0, y-intercept of 0, 8. Anybody that got -4 instead of -16? Usually students, when they do -8 divided by 1/2, will get -4.
Wait, how'd you get 5/3 for 9?
You're plugging in 0 for your y, and so that you'll have 3x minus 5. You're going to add the 5 over here to this side. That'll give you 5 equals 3x, and then it'll divide by that 3. Okay? I'm kind of doing a shortcut here whenever I do 11 and 12. You can use it if you would like. It'll save you a little bit of time. So, let's see. Let me make this. How do I make that? Okay. So, what I'm doing is I'm kind of like taking this right here, covering up the y, because it's going to be 0, so the y and everything with it will be 0. So then you just get 3x equals 15. If you divide both sides by 3, x equals 5. So that's your x-intercept there. Then you can do the same thing for your y-intercept. You're going to cover up the x and everything with it. So you get -5y equals 15. And so y equals -3. So that's a 0, -3. Your x-intercept for 12 should be 8, 0. Y-intercept for 12 should be 0, -16. Okay, questions on those? All right, here's the last thing. And we've really already done this for y-intercepts. We're going to be looking at tables. So, at an x-intercept, we must remember, what does y equal? Why does it not let me write? Sometimes it has a cow. Alright, let's type y equals 0. At an x-intercept, x equals 0. Alright. So, I'm going to type this in because it's not letting me write. I need to restart my computer, but I don't want to mess up the video. So, if I'm looking at this table, and I'm looking for the x-intercept, okay? If I'm looking for the x-intercept, what is going to equal 0? The y, okay? What is the point that you have where your y equals 0? It is 6, 0, right? It's this point right here, this last one on the table. Your y coordinate is 0 there, so the 6, 0, that's your x-intercept. Spelling intercept wrong. Okay, for the y-intercept, it is 0, 6. Okay, it's this point. X equals 0, the y equals 6. We're okay there? All right, 14 is more difficult. Now, one of them is still pretty straightforward. All right, x-intercept and the y-intercept. Which one can we find right off? Are you sure about that? At the x-intercept, the y equals 0. At the y-intercept, the x equals 0, right? So at this point right here, I've got 0, 7. My x is 0, so that's my y-intercept. 0, 7 is my y-intercept. I can find that easily from the graph, from the table. I cannot easily find the x-intercept, but I can find it. It's not quite as easily. I need to look for where the y is going to be 0. Where is the y going to be 0? Like over here past 3 or back here before 0? Past 3, right? Because I'm decreasing. 7, 6, 5, 4. So what I can do is I can just continue my table, which, let me try again here. If I could just write, it would be easier. Okay, so I would have 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And then this would be 3, 2, 1, 0, right there. So what is my x-intercept? 7, 0. These are not the best examples because they end up being the same number in both cases. That definitely does not happen all the time. That just happened to pick numbers where that did happen. Okay, questions? All right, try these on your own. A vertical line is not going to have a y-intercept unless it is on the y-axis, in which case it would intercept it everywhere. So vertical, and that's a good question though. Vertical lines are only going to have an x-intercept. And horizontal lines will only have a y-intercept unless they are on one of the axes. Yeah. You could just write none if you get one that is a... Yeah. Okay. All right, try these real quick. All right, let's look at these. Let's see. Kaylee, what's my x-intercept for... It's right now. It just connects everything. Even. Oh, look, it's letting me erase now. Alright, let's see. Is it going to revive? Alright. Alright, I can write with the mouse, which is super hard to do. Coach Wood is really good at this. Coach Wood lost his pen one year and didn't have it for like 6 months or something. So he only used the mouse, and he got really good at writing. Well, as good as his handwriting is ever going to be with the mouse. Coach Wood is not particularly known for his good handwriting, but so I'm going to try it, but I'm not as good as he is. All right, so x-intercept, and I forgot who I asked now. Kaylee, what was it? Okay, is 0, 0. All right, Isabella, what's the y-intercept? Also 0, 0. I'm just going to put this also equals the y-intercept. It's legible. Okay. All right. So, for 16, there's one of them you can find straight away from the graph. It is your y. So, your y-intercept, what is it, Lanaya? Okay. As a point, what would the coordinates look like? 0, 6. Good. 0.5, 0. Have you guys checked or is she right? I think you're right. It needs to be a bigger number. Because
it's 5. Oh, wait, no.
So like 4 would be 4, right? 5 would be 3.5. Okay? 6 would be 3. We could keep doing this, right? And you could just get all the way to the answer, which some people are telling me is 11. 12. All right. Here's another strategy. If we've got the y-intercept, can we find the slope? All right. The slope would be, you're going down 1/2, and you're going up 1. So changing y over changing x would be -1/2 over 1. So our slope is -1/2, so you could do y equals -1/2 x plus 6. Like that. That's the equation of this line. And then if we're looking for x-intercept, we plug in 0 for y. So we could do 0 equals -1/2. Gosh, this is annoying. X plus 6. You're going to subtract that 6, so you'll get -6 equals -1/2 x. You're going to divide by -1/2. Over here, you will also divide by -1/2. And 6 divided by negative 6 divided by negative 1/2 is going to give you 12. So those of you that said 12 were correct. 12, 0. It may be easier to just finish out the table. It's up to you. That's just another strategy you could possibly use. Okay? Questions?
I know I did wrong. I just found that I found the slit instead of finding the edge.
Yeah. Okay. 17. Which one can we find easily? X-intercept is 3, 0. All right. Y-intercept, I believe you're going to be right, because if definitely I would just finish out the, you know that 3 is 0, right? 2 is going to be negative 2. 1 would be negative 4. And 0 would be negative 6. Yeah, so the Y here is 0, negative 6.
Do we have a question mark?
No. I think maybe, I don't know if we have another quiz before the test. We're going to have a test next week. So we may not.
What is the test?
I'll have to look and see. Basically all the equational line stuff. Anything about writing the equational line.
So when is
I'm not planning quite that far ahead. But probably like, I'm thinking Wednesday next week, maybe. But I could be wrong about that. Alright. Okay, this one. Do we know the x-intercept or the y-intercept? Looking at it. No, but if we add one more slot to the table here, we would get 0. So 6, 0, is that the x or the y? That is the x-intercept.
Y is 8.
If I added 1 right here, I'd get 15, 0. Up here would be 18. Lanaya is correct. 0, 18. This is painfully slow, isn't it? Oh. Okay. Is Y. All right. So, your assignment that you're going to work on right now is on Delta Math. And okay, these first questions that are given to you are going to be like some of those I've given you before, where you don't get a second chance on them. Because I had to put those questions in myself because Delta Math did not have it as a possibility. And so it doesn't let it pull from like a question bank if that's the case. So as long as I do not start to think that you were just guessing, like if you're putting in stuff that doesn't make any sense at all, you miss almost all of them. I can clearly, it also tells me how long you spent on it. So if you spend like 2 minutes on the whole assignment and you're clearly just like typing in junk, then I will not give you credit. But otherwise, as long as you complete these, it's okay if you miss a few of them. I will give you full credit for the assignment. And then the last part, the x and y intercepts, when it starts doing this, this asks you to graph the x and y intercepts. So like if I were doing this problem, let's see if it'll let me write on this. Oh, that's not what I want. I want this. Okay, if I were doing this problem, if I'm looking for the x-intercept, I'm just thinking divide by 2, x equals 6. So I would drag my x intercept over here to 6. And then if I'm doing the y-intercept, 2x plus 4y equals 12. I would put a 0 for my x, divide by 4, y equals 3. So I would move my y-intercept to 3 right here. So this is like another way you can graph as well, right? And then you would submit your answer. I think you need to type it in as a coordinate. So it don't just put 3, put 0, 3. It is homework if you do not finish it. Okay.